The audio is coming through clearly. I should get a feed in a minute or two. Not just yet. I'm going to refresh my screen for just a minute until I can make sure that the audio is coming through. And then we will go live. I'll be answering a couple of questions today from a guy named Seth. Sent me a whole string of messages over on Instagram. I have an Instagram page. I don't post there very often, but it exists. I don't usually take questions from Instagram, but there we go. I got audio on my end. Cool. Here we go. We're in business. Again, please let me know if you are in the chat, if you can hear me, because I hate doing a live stream for like an hour or two. I'm only going to go about 30 minutes today. And then after 2 hours, the common complaint comes up. We can barely hear you. Can you turn up the volume? Now is the time to do that. You can hear me. The magic banana is in the chat and can hear me. Max says loud and clear. The Fox says, I can hear you. Seamus Owen says, heard. Tobias says, hey, we can hear you. Sweet. So we got some witnesses of the voice in the chat. Do I still take questions by emails? Sure. If you have a question, send me a question at ramseydewey@gmail.com, and I will do my best to answer that question. So I'm going to read some questions from our friend Seth, but I'm going to focus on this one in particular. He says, hey, Ramsey, can you make a video topic on this? Why martial arts today is watered down, and what it was in ancient times. In ancient times, they only did things to survive, but today's martial arts, it's all more of a sport than survival because of tournaments. But back then, they didn't really have tournaments. This is objectively false, Seth. Not true. Not even a little bit. They had lots of tournaments in ancient times, in antiquity, and all of that time frame in between then and now. Tournaments are not new. But on with the question. They didn't really have tournaments. They just have challenges to the death. Untrue. Because I do a lot of reading on a lot of samurai culture and the ancient ways of the old and try to put into the now times. All right, that's great that you're doing a lot of reading on samurai culture. Keep reading, because you'll learn a lot of very interesting things about Japanese culture, Japanese history, and the history of combat sports. Did you know that, speaking of Japanese combat sports, sumo, the tournament format, the combat sport of sumo, not a fight to the death, but a challenge to see who can push or throw whom out of the ring or get them to touch the floor with any part of the body besides the sole of their feet, is not to the death. And that's about 1,000 years old. And that is based on an even older combat sport. Seth goes on to say, I watch your videos a lot. Cool. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. But back then, they only did it to survive. They didn't do it for tournaments like how martial arts is practiced today. Okay, now this whole answer is not going to me just ripping on Seth saying, hey man, they actually did have tournaments back then. But let's address his primary question of why it seems that martial arts seems to be watered down today compared to what we generally think of when we talk about martial arts in ancient times. In ancient times, back in the past, everything was better. This is a common thing. I'm going to tell you a little story. So earlier today, my older daughter, she's about 12 years old, she saw some type of meme on the internet referencing the old Popeye cartoons. Popeye the Sailor Man. She didn't know who Popeye was because she didn't grow up in that generation. And she said, who is this guy? What's his deal? And so I tried to explain what Popeye was, and I thought, you know what, I'll just show her some some clips of the cartoon, see what she thinks. So we start watching some clips of the old Popeye cartoons, where he's getting bullied by Bluto, and then he takes out his can of spinach, squeezes it, the spinach jumps out of the can into his mouth, granting him superpowers. And then Popeye beats up Bluto, and Olive Oyl is so impressed by the mayhem and the violence caused by the greenery that she falls head over heels for Popeye. And they live happily ever after until the next episode where the same thing happens one more time. And as my daughter was watching this, she said, "What the heck kind of brain rot did they expose you to back in the olden days? This is garbage." And as she said this, I thought of all of the old people who have been saying that to young people, about young people things, about things young people like, for time immemorial. Why, back in my day, things were different. Why, it was better back in my day. Not like you young kids today, you don't understand. But she was throwing an Uno reverse card on me right there, saying, why, in my day, things are better. In your day, it sucked, and that was garbage, and you know it. Sorry to all of you folks who love Popeye the Sailor Man, but my daughter hated it and thought it was mind-numbingly stupid. And that was fascinating, because once again, most of us tend to flip the other way around and think of the past as something better than it really was. We look at the past through rose-colored glasses. Why do we do it? Why do we do it? I think it's to give ourselves an excuse, to give ourselves an out, so that instead of working harder or more consistently or doing the right thing to improve society to our projected ideal, instead we project that ideal into the past and think, well, it happened in the past, it can't happen today, because those were magical times. Today is the most magical time in the history of ever. Today. 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 So, are martial arts watered down today? There are more people practicing martial arts on this planet than there ever have been. But what about all the fake black belts, Coach? Look, if you are a student of history, let's discuss historical European martial arts for a minute. Or not even that far back, just Renaissance sword dueling for just a minute. It was very popular back then for men to carry swords, even if they didn't know how to sword fight, even if they were no good at fencing. They would carry swords. It was a status symbol. Look how cool I am. I'm a tough guy. I've got a sword. And then some guys would go an extra step, and they'd give themselves fake scars to show, like, oh, look, I'm a duelist, and I survived. This is how incredibly awesome I am. It's comparable to those posers today who give themselves cauliflower ear without actually earning it on the mat by crushing the cartilage in their ears, so that people will think, oh, that guy must know how to wrestle. That guy must know how to fight. Watch out for him. There have always been posers. There have always been people watering it down because the desire to get the result without the work isn't new. It's ancient. It is as old as humans. Go back to Genesis, the story of Cain and Abel. The first two brothers we get any information about in the Bible. And Abel, he's doing the right thing. He's a farmer. He's working hard. And Cain, he wants what his brother has. I got that backwards. Abel was a shepherd. He tended flocks. Cain was the farmer. But Cain wanted what his brother had. What did he do? Did he pull himself up by the bootstraps and work really hard? No, he killed his brother and took his stuff. Tried to do it the easy way. It's not new. The idea of appropriating valor, stolen valor, man. We generally use that word in reference to military, like people pretending that they went to war, pretending they got a medal they didn't really. But if there's a different word for martial arts as far as stealing valor, please let me know in the comments. I don't know it, if there is such a thing. But essentially, stolen valor in the context of combat sports, that's ancient. People have been doing that. Back in ancient Rome, gladiatorial combat was very popular. And there were Roman emperors who wanted the prestige of getting in the arena and fighting. But of course, they didn't want a fair fight. They didn't want to actually die. They just wanted to look cool doing it. And so there were some fixed fights, or fights fixed in their favor. But as far as just tournaments, not death fights, not gladiatorial fights to the death, this happens across cultures. Every single culture on this planet, ancient and modern, has independently developed a form of grappling, some type of wrestling, and done it as ritual combat, as a tournament. It's something innate, it's something primordial, it's something productive. And it's a way where we can fight to the death, but nobody has to die. In fact, with grappling, we can do it to the point where nobody even has to get seriously hurt. And you can go to work the next day. Or you can go to war the next day, depending on what your culture and your time period required. Tournaments existed. Have you heard of jousting? It's a dangerous type of tournament, but that's a fairly ancient type of ancient tournament where, generally speaking, people didn't have to die. But they sure got banged up quite a bit. The oldest martial art in China, Shuaijiao, jacketed wrestling from northern China. I did a whole video on this. We generally think that Kung Fu is ancient. Most of the modern styles aren't really that old. Most of the styles you know of aren't any older than 300 years old. Actually, most of them are from the 1900s. But Shuaijiao, that's ancient. That one goes back literal thousands of years. Was it used in actual warfare? Sure. But was it used as a tournament where nobody had to die and people competed against each other for fun, for prestige, for money, etc.? Yes, that totally happened. So let's go back, because I think we pooped on half of this question enough, which is combat sports are ancient, actually, Seth. So read your books, study a little more. But are they watered down more than they used to be? I don't think they are. I think in many ways they are less watered down than they used to be. And I'll tell you why. Specifically because we have technology that enables us to do more while sustaining fewer injuries. And if by watered down you mean sustaining fewer injuries, as if that was a bad thing, then I would say you're wrong. to think that, but that's my opinion, and I'm going to stick to it. Take, for example, wrestling mats. When amateur wrestling was first included in the Olympics, I don't remember what year it was, early 1900s, and this was the one and only time that catch wrestling, it was called amateur wrestling, but the actual rules were catch as catch can. It's the only time catch wrestling was included as an Olympic sport. But back then, wrestling mats were not made out of expanded foam, where you could take a nice fall and not get scraped up and not hurt yourself too badly. Do you know what they were made out of? Horsehair. Covered in canvas. They were rough. They didn't have a lot of give to them. And it was better than being thrown on rocks, I guess. But it was fairly unforgiving. Similarly, the original judo mats, tatame, do you know what that is? It's a mat made out of woven bamboo. It's better than being thrown on pavement. But it's not nearly as nice as being thrown on an actual cushioned mat with some give to it. Especially if you have a sprung floor underneath. That's awesome. And that's a technology from like less than 100 years ago. Wrestling mats used to suck. If we had those wrestling mats today, the number of cases of staph infections and other mat-borne illnesses alone would go up. The number of abrasions on the skin would skyrocket to the point where most people wouldn't want to train anymore. And the number of injuries resulting from uncontrolled falls would be astronomical. So is grappling watered down because we have better technology to absorb falls better, to protect us so we can actually do the activity more and get better at it? Nay, my friend, nay, as horses say. That's old-timey English for no. When you're able to do the activity more, you're able to get better at the activity. When you can spar more, you can get better at fighting. If your sparring injures you, you don't get better at fighting because you can't keep doing it. Max is mentioning that he used to practice ninjutsu on wooden floors. Yeah, dude. All the old Taekwondo tournaments and a lot of the karate tournaments used to be on wooden floors, like in basketball gymnasiums. Funny how that happened. And I remember competing in some tournaments on wooden floors without mats. I mean, they don't do that anymore. But it was fairly common back in the day. There's a video that started circulating the internet of one of Joe Rogan's old Taekwondo matches. And it's like in a basketball court on wooden floors, no mats. And he does this crazy jumping, turning back kick and blasts the dude into the nether realm, basically. And there is nothing protecting this dude from cracking his head open when he hits the floor. It did suck on wooden floors, and not just if you got knocked down, it was rough on the feet. And so that alone, just the surface area, even though it's Taekwondo, you're not rolling on the floor, you're not grappling on the floor, there are no takedowns, it's still rough on the body a lot more than it needs to be. If you just put a couple of centimeters of foam under your feet, that solves a lot of problems and allows you to train a lot longer and get a lot better at the activity. Yeah, Davey mentions that training on wooden floors gives you blisters on your feet. Yeah, it certainly can. I have a degree in modern dance, and modern dance is a barefoot dance form, and you dance on wooden floors. And the first few months of this, going through This university degree, yeah, it was basically building up calluses on my feet. Now, it's different than, say, doing ballet, where you can dance on a wooden floor, or a marley floor, which is like a rubberized top on a wooden floor, but it's hard. But in ballet, you've got shoes, and those shoes allow you to turn and spin without having to condition your feet into calloused hobbit soles, man. Max also says this: break falls on wooden floors are not fun either. Neither are takedowns. This is true. And the less fun a martial art is, the fewer people are going to do it. The fewer people do it, the smaller the talent pool is going to be. And the smaller the talent pool is going to be, the worse the martial art is going to be. And therefore, the martial arts are going to get watered down, which is why I would say it is literally the opposite of what Seth said. Martial arts actually were more watered down in many ways in the past than they are now. But Ramsey, what about all the cash grab McDojos out there? Yeah, you think that's a new thing? It's just we've got more people now. And now we've got more people doing the same things that people have always done. And now we have the internet, and it's more noticeable because it's broadcast to the world. All right, I think that's it for Seth's first question. He sent me a bunch of others. He was asking me for some relationship advice. And I don't think I'm going to read that question right now because it's extremely personal. So maybe we'll skip that one. I'm going to open up the floor to your questions. We'll do a live Q&A here for a minute. So if you have any questions, I'll take a few minutes, just a few. Don't have a lot of time. I got to skedaddle fairly soon. I just wanted to do a quick live broadcast for you guys tonight. But if you have questions, please write them in the chat, and I'll take your questions and answer them live. If you have super chats, I'll give those priority. And yeah, let's go. Looking through the backlog to see if anybody wrote any questions. Tyler Conway earlier asked, what are your thoughts on me having had multiple shoulder dislocations, but I want to continue further into kickboxing? I've had multiple partial shoulder dislocations, and what kept me going was rehab. Keep strengthening your shoulders and never stop strengthening your shoulders, and make your shoulders as strong as you possibly can throughout the duration of your life. Because if you don't, you're going to keep dislocating or partially dislocating that and tearing up the soft tissue, holding that thing together. The muscles here, all of this stuff, that is like the best type of sling to hold that thing in place the way it should be. So make those as strong as you can and never, ever quit. 44S Wagnum Maga number 5 says, thoughts on lifting barefoot versus wearing shoes? I think my feet get wider. Lifting bare may be stronger. Okay. Let's talk about lifting shoes or lack thereof. My advice about lifting shoes, and this is going to come with the caveat of what type of lifting you're doing. If you are doing any sort of lifting standing on your feet, specifically a deadlift, a squat, an overhead press, the Olympic lifts, the snatch, the clean and jerk, any type of weight-bearing thing where you're standing up on your feet, you want to, if you're wearing shoes, be outfitted with lifting shoes. Now, there are actual weightlifting shoes. Hold on a second. I got a pair down here. Where'd they go? Where are my lifting shoes at? Oh, no, I stuck them in a bag. Hold on, guys. I am going to spend 1 minute grabbing my lifting shoes, and I'm going to be right back. Never mind. I stuck them in the other room, apparently. But Google it. Google it right now. You're on a device with the internet. Google weightlifting shoe or squatting shoe. And you might notice the old ones have wooden soles. The modern ones tend to have hard plastic or fiberglass soles. They are stiff and they are solid, and then they essentially emulate standing on a hard floor. And yeah, I have two pairs of weightlifting shoes. But again, they've got a raised heel to facilitate squatting and to facilitate the Olympic lifts. And if you're doing those lifts, weightlifting shoes are a great asset to have. That being said, if you're doing deadlifts, the raised heel might actually be somewhat of a hindrance. When deadlifting, if you can go barefoot and your feet are not slipping on the lifting platform, which is why it always makes me cringe when I see people deadlifting in socks on a slippery platform and then they start doing some cartoon physics nonsense when they try to pull that weight up. Yeah, barefoot deadlifting is great. Alternatively, have a very flat, fairly solid, flexible soled shoe, like a wrestling shoe, for example. Those are great shoes to deadlift in. If you can't go barefoot, for example, if your gym has a no barefoot lifting policy, get yourself some very flat, flexible shoes. You don't want a squishy, soft sole. I have a few more things to say about shoes. Shoes cause a lot of problems, specifically because modern shoes, let me see if I can find a shoe. Oh, here we go. Okay, here's a Kung Fu slipper. And you might notice this Kung Fu slipper is a different shape than my actual foot. My foot is wide, and the Kung Fu slipper, which is the same basic shape as most basic shoes, is narrow by like a lot. My toes come out to here, and this thing is like 2 inches less wide. And so if I wear a basic shoe, just like most of you guys, the toes are pinched into a point. They're pinched into a point, and that's terrible. It essentially deforms your shoes. Naturally, imagine your toes are fingers. Like, I can spread my fingers out like this. Can you spread your toes out like that? I can. Because I spend a lot of time barefoot, moving around barefoot, doing athletic things barefoot. It's good for you. But if you're always wearing those pointy-toed shoes, and you might not think your shoes are pointy, but they probably are, then it forces your toes to do things like this. And that's not good for you. It's not good for your balance, your athleticism, your stability, the fascia in your feet, your quads, your glutes, everywhere else. It affects your entire body. So if you wear shoes all the time, consider taking those things off when you're doing some movement. At least part of the day, man. Foot health is imperative for overall full body health and longevity. All right, do we have any other questions? Hey Ramsey, are you facing Master Wong? No, I'm facing a computer, and on the screen it says Multiverse Productions is asking me the question, hey Ramsey, are you facing Master Wong? Master Wong has said in no uncertain terms that he does not want to fight me. And he said that years ago, so I don't think he's changed his mind. He does want to call me an idiot, though. He did say that multiple times. So that wasn't a very nice thing to say. I forgive him, though. Master Wong, Michael, I forgive you. Evan Collis says, me and my friends are planning a trip to China in a couple of years. What are some must-go areas? Man, I had a conversation with my wife about traveling earlier today, and she asked me, what are all my dream locations to travel to? And I thought about that for a minute, and I realized I didn't really have any. There are experiences I want to have, some of which require travel or international travel, but I never really think of it as, if I go to this location, then I'm going to have this experience. But what are some cool things in China? You don't want a whole philosophical diatribe about the destination is the way, or whatever, or the destination is not the way. What's cool in China? I don't know. I like Inner Mongolia. I recently got back from there. It's a nice place to visit when it's hot and humid. In southern China, you go way up north and the climate's much cooler. It's nice. I love Mongolian food. They have some of the best lamb, the best braised barbecued lamb ever. It's amazing. There's some very, very good restaurants over there. Depends on why you like to travel. If you like to go on, say, a culinary vacation, oh man, there's some interesting ways to do that in China. There is a high-speed train network that connects a bunch of the major cities from southern China to northern China, and you can travel, for example, from Shanghai to Beijing. That's like going from New York to LA in like 2 hours, something like that. It goes crazy fast, and it's pretty cheap. It's very affordable. So transportation across China is great. It's affordable, it's fast, it's easy. So you could see a lot of sights on a fairly shoestring travel budget. What else? I also recently went to Chengdu, the province famous for all the bamboo and the pandas. It was hot. It was pretty oppressively hot there. So my kids complained the whole time up in Chengdu. I've traveled across most of this country, but I did most of my traveling back when I was still fighting. And so I can say, oh, I've been to most of the provinces of China, but what I saw in most of the provinces of China was a hotel room, the airport, the fighting venue, the inside of a boxing ring or a fight cage, and then back to the airport and fly to some other city and do the same thing, rinse and repeat. Once in a while, we'd go out, go to a restaurant, maybe look at a scenic site before we left. But again, most of my time traveling across this country has been for work. And I also did a lot of traveling when I was doing fight commentary for Kunlun Fight. We traveled to a bunch of the provinces of China, but again, it was generally a plane or a train, a hotel room, and then the arena, the venue. So right now, my wife and I are planning a trip to Australia. She's always wanted to go. I have a bunch of friends in Sydney. I've been there before. I was there for the ultimate self-defense catastrophe last year, where my left knee was permanently crippled. But she wants to go back. She wants to hold a koala, pet kangaroos, things like that. So if you are in Australia, I will be coming back to your neighborhood in the near future. But anyway, that's what got us talking about this topic, about travel. If you like seeing big cities, Shanghai is a big city. It's the biggest city in China. It's huge. There's a bunch of cool stuff in Shanghai. In fact, there's so much stuff in Shanghai, it's very difficult to give you a rundown of everything there is. Al C is in the chat. He says, "Hi all, off to my first MMA event, PFL in Glasgow. Hope it's fun. Are you watching or spectating?" I assume you're watching. Do we have a PFL fighter in the chat? If so, good luck. Hands raised at the end. Daniel Lorette wants to know how far I am from the Shaolin Temple. The Shaolin Temple is in Henan. Henan is several provinces away from Shanghai. I've been to Henan before. Let's see here. Let's pull out a map. You could do this yourself. I'm just Googling China map right here. China map. Okay. Maybe I should look up map of provinces. Let's take a look. Approximately how far away is Henan from Shanghai? Okay. That is approximately... Now you can't see the map unless you Googled it like I just did. It's... I don't have mileage here. Let's see here. But it's a couple provinces over. Yeah. So China is huge geographically, but again, it's pretty easy to get around the place. In sharp contrast to, say, living in the United States of America, where the infrastructure makes it quite difficult to travel. The infrastructure makes it impossible to get to work, for example, unless you have a car. Like, you can travel all over China without owning a motor vehicle. It's awesome. Public transportation is amazing here. Nino Carter says, "Do I think Conor McGregor will fight again?" Conor McGregor is fighting a battle every day that each of us know nothing about. As are we all. We're all fighting a battle in here that nobody else understands but Jesus. Because he's already fought that battle and won. Dark Horse Pestilence says, "What is my favorite old school PC game?" You know, I didn't have a PC when old school PC gaming was really an in thing. I had a VIC-20. My older brother had one. And a Commodore 64. And to play video games back then, we had to borrow these compute magazines, which would have pages and pages of code, binary code. And you would enter that code, you'd spend hours and hours entering that code into the computer. What you were doing is basically typing the code of the game you wanted to play. And if you were one of those rich kids who could afford a tape drive, which would use the old audio cassettes to record digital information, you could spend about 30 minutes recording that code onto the tape. And then, if you wanted to play one of those simple games, you'd spend about 30 minutes loading it up again, which was way faster than spending all day and on to the next day and the next typing in the binary code. So that's how we played games back in the day, and that's the way we liked it. Ancient times were so cool, weren't they? Harkening back to the original question in this video. So we came full circle right there, didn't we? Video games are very fun, very interesting innovation that have led to all kinds of advancements in technology, not just video game technology, but all types of advancements in computing technology. So it would be very funny if someone like myself said, back in my day, video games were better. Now, here's an analogy I'm going to make about video games from the old days being better, and I'll tell you how, and how martial arts in the old days may have been better, and I'll tell you how. Back in ancient times when video games were still fairly new, and the technology was limited, the memory was almost non-existent, the graphics required heavy use of the imagination. Imagination was key. You couldn't just essentially throw special effects, cool-looking graphics, and wow people with, wow, this looks neat. The idea had to be neat. The idea had to be very interesting. It had to be imaginative. People had to get very creative with an idea to make essentially bad technology or primitive technology make an appealing game. So the concept had to be good. So if you look at a game like Tetris, for example, absolutely genius game. It was fun back then. It's still fun today. Tetris holds up. Because of the graphical limitations, they had to use creativity to create an idea that endured. That's really cool. If you contrast that with a lot of games that have come out in the last 10 years, there were some great ones, but I guarantee 5 years from now, people aren't going to remember them so much. Where they'll look back and think, that game didn't age well. But Tetris certainly did. Pac-Man, by today's standards, terrible graphics, but very cool concept. In many ways, it still holds up, although I found that a lot of people from the younger generation, essentially, if you're younger than 30, you probably suck at Pac-Man. Even if you consider yourself a good gamer, even if you're like a competitive gamer, if you're under 30, you probably suck at Pac-Man. Funny how that works. Like people from my generation, like if you wanted like street cred in the arcades, you had to be good at Pac-Man. No ifs, ands, or buts. That was like the gold standard of gaming skill. If you could not complete like the first 10 levels of Pac-Man at least, forget about it. Forget about it. Yeah, case in point, Zweebelchen, however you say your name, is 37 and sucks at Pac-Man. Yes, if you're in your 30s, you probably suck at Pac-Man. So let's bring this back to martial arts here. So again, back in the old days, there were some terrible games made that did not age well. But again, because of the limitations, they were able to make these enduring IPs that still hold up today, that are still fun and challenging and interesting today, like Tetris and Pac-Man, and there are some others as well. And like a game I would love to see remade more, Archon 2. Those games were awesome. It's basically kind of like a combat chess type of concept. And in the sequel, they changed it up and added some extra layers of complexity, a few other variables, and they were really fun. The graphics were terrible. The controls were kind of janky, but the concept was cool. So, in ancient times, where the technology, and I'm using that word kind of loosely because fight training technology hasn't actually advanced that much. In some ways, because of emulsions, for example, it's advanced incredibly, as we've already discussed with the invention of essentially rubberized, expanded foam mats that have allowed us to log in much more training hours with far fewer injuries. Okay, but in older times, you had to be more creative. You had to be a lot more creative to get something out of martial arts. There was a lot less information widely available about martial arts. You couldn't just go to YouTube and type in, give me 10 cool, interesting drills I can do in my jiu-jitsu class to help my jiu-jitsu get better, and then get a whole string of videos that actually are helpful and useful pop up. You had to use your imagination. You had to use your personal initiative to improve. And so, in one way, that forced a type of improvement that is more rare today, I would say, but forced it in far fewer people, because most people did not have that personal initiative to do those things. RK says, Ramsey, how can I train to fight at home? I struggle with anxiety and cannot go to the gym. Well, if you're struggling with anxiety to the point where you can't go to the gym, I wouldn't be too worried about stepping foot in a fight cage or a boxing ring or onto the mat, because you're probably not going to do that. And so my question for you is, what are you training to fight for specifically? If you are training to fight for health and fitness and personal improvement, then great. Just do some solo training, do some shadow boxing, do some exercises, push-ups, pull-ups, jump around a little bit. If your social anxiety prevents you from making friends, it's going to be rough to improve very much. But again, if it's just for health and fitness because you're not actually going to use it, then great, just get healthy. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, NB Taekwondo Academy mentions that the safety equipment used in Taekwondo, like gloves, shin pads, the hogu, the body protector, had a revolutionary impact on martial arts training. In his opinion, suddenly a lot of, if they did this, then I'd just do that, kind of ended because of safety and repetition. In other words, people started sparring more and realized, oh, if you do that, then you actually kicked me, and the thing that I imagined in my mind wasn't real. Sure. Yeah, if you can find a safer way to spar, you'll end up doing more sparring, and you'll see what actually works and what doesn't. Dark Horse Pestilence 4778 says, Ramsey, have you ever trained through tragedy? And if so, how did you get through that rough patch? How are we understanding tragedy? like feeling very bad, depression, death of a loved one, your entire city gets locked down by the CCP and everybody is effectively imprisoned and sent off to concentration camps and slowly starving and dying of thirst, that sort of tragedy. I don't know, there are lots of types of tragedy out there. And I have found that getting out there and training is an excellent way to cope with feeling like garbage. Regardless of what's making you feel bad, getting out there and training never makes it worse. All right, guys, I think I'm going to take one more question, then hang it up here. Nargul says, do I remember correctly that you said in one of your videos, don't fight when you don't get paid for it, or something along those lines? I did say something like that. I assume this is like getting paid in advance in pro fights. So the context in which I said that is, don't get into street fights. Street fights are dumb. What the heck are you getting into a street fight for? Oh, but Ramsey, this guy pushed me, so I got to push him back. No, you don't. Oh, but this guy said something mean to me. No, you don't. Oh, but this guy gave me a look, so I got to fight him. No, you don't. This guy said something to my girl. Now I got to beat him up. No, you don't. If you're not being paid handsomely for a fight, what the heck are you doing it for free for? To recap, an accountant doesn't go out there on the streets and look at somebody and say, you, let me file your taxes for you for free. No, please don't. Doesn't happen. And yet for some reason, dudes are just throwing their brains away on the streets, doing this thing they should be getting paid for, they should be training for, they should be preparing for, so they can intelligently protect themselves at all times, but they don't. They just throw that out there for free and splatter their brains all over the concrete and end up in jail or with a criminal record. It's stupid. Don't fight for free. If you're going to get in a fight, train for it, get paid for it. Be a professional. Professional fighting, you generally don't get paid in advance. You get paid to show, meaning you make weight, you step in the ring, you do the thing, and you get paid more to win. Generally, you win twice the money, usually, not always, depending on what your contract says. But anyway, that is the context of what I said. Multiverse Production says, is karate useful in sparring situations? If you're in a karate class and you're sparring, preparing for a karate sparring tournament, karate is the perfect tool to use for that scenario. In fact, you could say it is the most perfect tool to use to prepare for a karate sparring competition. Does it have athletic crossover to other combat sports? Sure. How much? That's highly variable. We prepare for the thing by doing the thing. All right, guys. That's it for me. Gonna hang it up. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. Now get out there and train.